In terms of these patterns, what else have you seen in looking through the microscope?
That's a great question. And this was what was interesting. So pattern-wise, yes, early treatments I saw with my colleagues, and I didn't treat a ton of patients, and my colleagues treated a lot more than I. I helped where I could because I was busy in the lab. But in the lab, after the shots rolled out, so I do a fair amount of skin biopsy work, and I noticed after the shots rolled out, there's this little viral bump that I generally see in children. It's called molluscum contagiosum. It's a parapox virus. And usually kids will get it. It's contagiosum is the name because it's pretty contagious, and kids, pass it back and forth when they're little. But usually by the time you're in your, tweens or teens, your immune system keeps it in check.
What does it do to people that have it?
That virus just causes little skin warty bumps. It's not a human papilloma virus. It's a parapox virus, but it causes this little white warty bump. So the interesting thing was, okay, kids get that. When the shots rolled out, you remember how we rolled it out to the older age groups first. So I get a lot of skin cancer biopsies from the dermatologists and family doctors around the country in my region. And I started noticing an uptick in this bump that I usually see in children, in the elderly. And I thought, oh, no, this is unusual. I never see this. This is an infection of childhood, not of the elderly. And then I started seeing more, and then more, and I thought, wait a minute, this is immune dysregulation of some sort. And I had already had my concerns about using an experimental therapy, not knowing what certain ingredients were, not knowing what they would do. And I had read thousands upon thousands of COVID paper. I became just COVID was my obsession, whether it was online lectures or reading lectures, looking at the immune responses, trying to find, is anybody writing about this, etc. So I saw that bump, I saw that immune dysregulation, I thought, uh-oh, Houston, we have a problem. Because that line of cells, that line of T cells that keeps viruses in check, that family of cells also keeps cancers in check. Well, at the same time, about a month or two later, all of a sudden there are certain types of cancers that I commonly see in the laboratory. After 500,000 patients, you kind of have an idea year over year what you're seeing. I started seeing endometrial cancers go up. And other certain type melanomas I started seeing thicker and earlier as well. And of course I thought, okay, is this because we've been locked down, or is this because people aren't going to their doctor? Are they missing their visits? Or is it correlating with a time frame in which people are getting the shots? A little bit of it was both, but I know which clinics never shut down during the pandemic, and I know which ones did. So I kind of did a statistical analysis and regression. I thought, okay, I'm seeing an increase in these certain things. Now, my colleagues will criticize and say, well, that's just anecdotal. And I can say, yeah, you're right. I only see, 25,000 patients, 40,000 biopsies a year. You can't do a complete statistical set on that. But at least I saw the patterns, and all science really starts with an observation. And so I pointed this out. And then interestingly, as I've been invited and talked at and lectured around the country, other oncologists have come up to me or called me. Or even just yesterday, a radiation oncologist came up to me and said, you're right, something is wrong. I am seeing cancers that we normally keep in check, and we know we can manage this cancer, and the patient will get 2, 3, 5, 6 good years of life. But they got their shot or they got their booster, and then 2 months later, their cancer is a wildfire. And these are things that we've managed easily in the past. So again, as a pathologist, I go to what's the pathophysiologic mechanism? What's causing this? What's going awry? And there was a really good paper by Dr. Fosse et al. Out of the Netherlands looking at the Pfizer vaccines. And they did a pretty good analysis of the immune system after the shots. And their conclusion was alarming and concerning in the sense that it said, we're seeing an alteration of the innate immune response. All you hear about in the news is antibodies, antibodies, antibodies. What are your antibodies? That's really not the most important part of our immune system. The most important part is our T cell response. Those are the Marines of our immune system, the first ones in. And they're the ones when an invader comes in, they have these little hand grenades. They poke a hole with an enzyme called a perforin, and then they throw in a granzyme and they blow up the infected cell. Same thing with cancer. They do the same thing. All day long, your immune system, these soldiers, your T cells, your macrophages, your dendritic cells, they're your front line saying, is something friend or foe? So they'll shake hands with your cells and say, oh, this cell has some mutations, this is an early cancer cell, they'll blow it up. Well, that study out of the Netherlands was saying this innate immune system, this innate immune response, seems to be altered and not acting right. And we have receptors, these little puzzle pattern receptors. This locks with that, and they're called toll-like receptors, spelled just like a toll road. So toll receptors 7 and 8 are very important for signaling to say to your body, hey, you need to be awake and on to fight off this virus, that virus, that virus, that virus. So we have virus in our bodies all the time, but our immune system says, nah, I'll keep you in check. You're not going to wake up. You can't infect me right now. We're revved. We know how to fight you off. There are also some toll-like receptors that are very important for talking to your innate immune system and your T cells saying, hey, if you're in normal numbers, then we'll be revved up and we'll fight off those cancer cells. Well, in that Pfizer study by Dr. Fossa, they realized these receptors are dropped down and tuned out or tuned all the way off in some. And so the problem now becomes that signal you have to your soldiers. Now the soldiers are snoozing or drunk in the barracks and they can't even wake up. And now if you look at the data, you realize after the shots, there were tons of shingles outbreaks. Tons of them. That was another pattern I saw in the lab as well. Well, that's because those toll-like receptors were downregulated. Same thing, I started seeing the uptick in cancers. Well, why is that? Because mechanistically, things that were always supposed to be on were unintentionally shut off. And in addition to that, we have other gene receptors to which this spike protein binds. The p53 tumor suppressor gene, the guardian of our genome. Dysregulation in that gene can also lead to cancer pathways. Well, we know part of the spike protein binds to that. The BRCA gene you hear about in breast cancers, same thing, it binds to that. So we know from a laboratory, nerdy, geeky point of view, the mechanisms. And so in the laboratory, I'm saying I'm seeing an uptick in cancers that I shouldn't be seeing, at rates I shouldn't be seeing, in age groups I shouldn't be seeing. And then I've talked to colleagues around the world, and they're starting to verify it. What we really need is when a scientist, you know, they just basically marginalize you and say, oh, that's, you know, out of the narrative, you know, don't look at that. My point of view is if we have something novel and new, which they say the virus was, even though it was 80% not novel, because it was so similar to SARS-CoV-1, when something is novel and new, i.e. these gene injections to stimulate an immune response, that's novel and new. So we should take this approach of the French legal system, guilty until proven innocent. So every adverse reaction, every odd pattern outside the normal after these shots should have triggered a red flag to say, we need to do an autopsy on that death. It was proximate to their shots. Or, gosh, this patient that was healthy and well now is not so healthy and well. We need to investigate, is this related to this new experimental modality that we're putting onto a broad world population? That would be the logical thing to do. That would be the observational and the scientific thing to do. Meanwhile, we had federal agents who shall not be named saying, or we could name them, it doesn't matter, but at the end of the day they said, don't do autopsies. We're not going to look at that. We're not going to fund that. Which doesn't, from a moral, ethical point of view, make any sense. If we're going to roll something out brand new in our population and then tell people they're safe and effective, there's no problems, you can't make that claim. In fact, I think it violates the False Claims Act in advertising here in the United States in terms of telling people they need to be in an experiment, something safe and effective, but you're not studying whether they are or not. Those of us who have kind of sounded the alarm, we're realizing in many people they're not safe and not effective.